Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to another episode of Island Tea with your faves, Kevon and Azem, featuring Jade, Gwenisha, Gwyneth Johnson. The
Hey
time
guys.
is 8:05 a.m. and it is Friday, September 24th.
Friday.
The weekend is upon us. Finally.
Azem, why you continue like a Spanish nation? What's the with this? Why you pushing me? Girl, why you pushing me down? I like it. Azem, come here before they send the US in here first. Anyway,
Morning.
Yes, good morning.
Send the US first?
Yeah, because
You raised the lowest use, right?
Huh?
You raised the US last.
That's true. Yes, so good morning, guys. We're back. It's
Disclaimer,
Friday.
I'm not a sleeper cell, okay?
What the heck?
Did you talk about sending?
But they know what I mean.
How they could not know it?
They know what I mean. Yeah.
Disclaimer, it's a disclaimer.
Yeah. He just dressed up because he ain't home.
Right.
Yo, Kevon, don't be so fed up of us, right? Like, you could just tell by his facial expressions always that he's just like over it.
And when he did saying all the things about who should what and what and what,
Mhm.
we don't get him here. The man literally tell the nation go be there.
And we don't say nothing.
We don't say nothing.
Did you not benefit from the advice? Did your neighborhood's aroma not change?
Again.
Wow.
Nice. Nice.
Fence rests.
You're the
Well.
fence rest boy.
Hey, big up Shabang one time. Shabang always early by.
Early, but guys,
Early to class.
as he should be.
Indeed.
We spoke about school yesterday, so
When he was in school, he never like that, no.
so you go. But
Shabang!
our friends in Antigua, they said they will be ready in 2 minutes, you know. They don't want to cut in
Yes.
anymore. Since we tell them they started cutting in like a Spanish station,
Mhm.
they started telling us, you know, they're going to be ready in 2 minutes and stuff. And we're actually talking to Mr. Peter Wickham. Oh, see?
Oh, Peter Wickham.
Yes.
Election time, talking.
Yeah, man. Anyway,
Election talk.
yeah, man. You know, favorite topic.
Not
But,
mine.
well, them.
Who's
people,
we?
The nation. The nation.
Oh, because I'm like, hello, what?
But our friends are ready. Good morning, Darren. Are you there?
Why you keep doing that?
Why I keep doing that? Oh, why he keep doing that? Because he said we're ready, you know. And I gave him a 5, 4, 3,
You say much better in the Spanish session.
2, 1. Darren.
Happy Friday.
There we go.
We don't say Friday here, we say Friday.
Yes.
Friday, yes. I think I saw
Friday.
WhatsApp in my feed was saying that. Happy Friday. So yes, it is Friday. I'm very pleased that it's Friday. I am exhausted. I'm tired of COVID, tired of mandatory vaccination, tired of politics, I'm just tired.
Oh, gosh.
But yes,
Yes,
I'm happy.
agreed.
Just tired.
Same.
Tired. Lord of mercy. I
Same.
think it's the first time I'm actually belting that out or belching that out. Anyway, we have our special guest joining us on the line. I see him. I don't know if he can see. You can see me. Yes, you can see me. My camera is up and ready. Peter, good morning.
Hey, morning. It's good to see you because I don't actually no. We always do see you. Yeah, that's right. We always
Yeah.
see you once.
I think two occasions ago we sorted out the camera thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're all
Okay.
linked up, and you can see Kevon. We can't see
Yes.
Jade. I don't know why Jade doesn't want us to, appreciate.
Jade playing shy.
Jade
Yes.
is playing shy, and Azem too. Azem don't want to, display his locks. I don't know what's going on, but anyway.
We don't want
Jade,
being all
Azem.
mixed up. So when they say that, you know, whatever happened on the show, they can't say that we were there.
Watch it, David ain't gonna give me a road there, you know. So I can cool over here.
Road out.
Anyway, Peter Wickham is the director of Cadres, well known and well respected polling organization in the Caribbean and further afield, and he's also a political analyst. We go to him oftentimes for his political viewpoints and assessments of controversial issues, especially because he's not afraid to tackle them on. I gotta give Peter full marks for that. He says it like he sees it, and who vex. Well,
Yeah.
am I
For
right?
better or worse.
Right, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how it is. And I say, from time to time, friends in St. Kitts when I invite Peter on. There's some folks who say, oh, why I keep inviting Peter? Why I keep inviting Peter? And I then come back with the question, give me an example of where Peter has been proven wrong. I mean, in terms of his polling especially, where has he been proven wrong? And usually I get dead end on the other end of the phone. Or they take a while to answer the question. His polls are usually spot on. I think in one case, Peter, you will readily admit the one where Fendel won the election. It was funny, it was close.
It was a shock to even him.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, he had no faith in himself, boy.
Yeah, so, I mean, his work speaks for himself, and I'm always happy to have him, and I will always defend his work because I think he's credible and he's fair and he lashes both ways. He will say to the sitting prime minister here, you could have dealt with this differently, and he will tell the opposition, y'all need to get your act together or else you will remain in opposition, and that's uncomfortable listening. But Peter, have you been proven wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it's always relative to the time, the context, and well, sometimes you could be right today and wrong tomorrow. But I'm comfortable that all stages have been honest. And I think that's the most important thing, that you're honest and true to the science and also true to what you're seeing and what you're hearing from Caribbean people.
Okay, understood. Yeah. Well, let's open the batting. Prime Minister, since the last time we had an engagement on the radio, Peter, you would have indicated we were discussing mandatory vaccinations. And this was pre the Gaston Brown administration going right down that road, i.e. mandatory vaccination for public sector workers and for parastatals. Since then, there has been a lot of course, reaction, both for and against. What's your assessment of where we are now post the cabinet decision of just over a week ago?
Yeah, I think we have moved. I think that we have moved in generally the right direction, and I think that we are moving in a better direction than we could have been had it not been for those kinds of decisions that have been taken. What I think is keenly interesting in the case of Antigua is that they have been threats of challenges to the courts and threats of mass protests and people staying away from offices en masse. None of these threats have been materialized. What has materialized is people have been going to the vaccination centers in larger numbers to become vaccinated, and ultimately that's what we want. For one reason or another, this issue has become highly politicized, with people who are opposing governments feeling that they have a vested interest in not being vaccinated. That's the case in St. Kitts and Nevis, as is the case in Antigua and Barbuda. And to some extent, opposition forces have played into that reality by, making statements which are clearly not supportive of the general agreement that we should all become vaccinated as quickly as possible. So, we have a strain of the virus that has taken off, and the numbers have been growing exponentially. And Gaston Brown has stepped forward and taken a very bold position and said, look, we have to do this thing. And I think the vast majority of people are complying. And the reality is that the situation in Antigua could be far worse now than it is. And I think that, his action has essentially staved off a catastrophe that could be looming. St. Kitts is luckier in a sense because you have done better in voluntary vaccinations than Antigua and Barbuda has, largely because of the size. And I think that one of the things that's been coming out in this situation is that countries that are smaller seem to have been able to manage the business better. So St. Kitts has done better in terms of that, and they haven't really had to deal with the issue of mandatory vaccination just yet. But it's entirely possible that it may come to that, if it does.
All right. Any reaction to Peter's comments, Jade?
Well, I mean,
question?
Thankfully, we are at a point where our vaccination rates are one of the highest in the world, despite everybody's hesitancy and all of the things that have been happening around people getting vaccinated, the little protests, the hesitancy, but the opposition's words that hasn't seemed to stop people. I think in the Caribbean, well, for us, we are a country that we say we're not doing something and we talk about it and we talk about it, but secretly, we do what we say we're not going to do. So that's why I think our vaccination rates are high. I saw in Antigua, honestly, after that announcement that the lions were around the corner, so that's good news. I don't know if it was really driven by, well, probably because I think it came after the announcement that you have to be vaccinated to work in different sectors in Antigua. So things are pushing. Also, I noticed yesterday that Trinidad is now saying that they will be opening up the country to vaccinated only. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays a role in the vaccination rates.
Yeah.
But what do you think is different in St. Kitts than Antigua, though? Why do you think the uptake in St. Kitts has been better than the uptake in Antigua?
Well, I know one thing that spiked the vaccination rate was the first outbreak. We had a very serious outbreak here, and that led people to run to the clinics. So that could be one. The fear of getting sick definitely prompts people to not to do what they said that they wouldn't do, despite all of the things that they were saying. When it hits closer to home, I think that's when people really start moving. So I'm not sure what is the difference here. I don't know if maybe people in Antigua wasn't experiencing what we were experiencing, which I don't think that's the case, because I know that Antigua has plenty cases as well. So I'm honestly not sure.
So honestly, I think I said it last week, and I think the term I used that we are aggressively passive.
Yes.
But I just don't believe that we are. We don't have a huge culture of mistrust of the powers that be. So this is something that's being preached by the powers that be, and I think generally people adhere to the messaging and comply. I think we have a tendency to comply as opposed to resist here.
Yeah. Somebody else is also saying that it could be our size. That's also
but in terms of percentage and thing, it might help to a certain extent, but people still have to go, right? People still have to go. So, I mean, when we start talking about why it seems that generally more people go here than some of the other islands, I really think it does come down to the mentality and the culture of the people, and I think it's really a matter that we tend to not have this mistrust of the powers that be, no matter who the powers that be are at the time.
Yeah, but unfortunately our numbers have not moved, it seemed like, for a while.
Because we're going on.
True. Yeah, it's been in the 75% for a while. So yeah, as him said, it's probably because who wanted to go has gone.
Tell her against stick radio.
Yeah. It's been stuck for a while, honestly. But I think what is going to happen now is that now the government and the health officials will have to look at let's say incentives to continue to see an increase in the rate. What they could do? What everybody is doing? Mandatory this and mandatory that. Oh, well.
let me ask you this real quick. Over in St. Kitts, did Dr. Timothy Harris and our members of his cabinet, did they get, actively involved in the whole COVID management process? Were they front and center, or was it more a case of the CMO and her team and so on, and the clinics and so on? Was there how did the politicians feature in this whole vaccination drive?
Well, I think that in itself is interesting. From my observation, initially, a lot of the rhetoric and the discussion, the faces of the pandemic, or the response to the pandemic, were the health officials, the CMO and the chief medical and Dr. Wilkinson. Those were the ones who were more up front and center. Once vaccination came into play, then I believe that we started seeing more of that messaging coming directly from the politicians. And so I even at the time I thought that was an interesting development, and perhaps help to fuel the you know what I'm saying?
Politicization
Of the issue.
Yes.
So
I mean, it was interesting to me though, because I remember early in the day, Dr. Douglas, who is himself a medical practitioner, took a position that he's not opposed to vaccinations. But he himself will not be vaccinated with the AstraZeneca, which was to me a very complicated position, as is the case with many of the positions that he takes. How was that received in St. Kitts and Nevis? Because I believe in the case of Antigua, certainly the opposition would have been all vaccinated fairly early in the day.
Well, I do believe that I think he was accused, of course, by fueling vaccine hesitancy and that kind of stuff by definitely by government factions. And I think it led to some of the supporters seeing the AstraZeneca vaccine as Timothy vaccine, and that's one of the things that you would have been hearing. But there are some persons who, and of course, could probably be said that they are supporters of the opposition, who would say, well, I mean, people ain't really listening to him. But I think we all know that influence is influence, and it spreads its wings throughout different topics, and this would be no different.
Yeah, but I don't feel like it. I feel like it's been a while since we've heard any type of pushback from the opposition when it comes to vaccination. Like, I feel like the last thing I heard about was them coming out and doing like a video with education. They spoke about, some educational stuff when it comes to vaccinations, not necessarily this vaccine, but vaccinations and COVID and all of these things.
There was some talk about the fact that there are several politicians within the opposition who are doctors, and people felt that they should have been more vocal. And so I do believe personally, in response to some of that rhetoric, they have some online pressers and spoke about vaccination and keeping healthy and stuff like that. So I did think I think they did respond to some of the pushback that came from those types of statements that they made early.
Yeah, and somebody saying that recently they have been encouraging people to become vaccinated.
Yes,
so
that's true.
I guess things changed. Maybe they did. I don't know if it was research or they just realized we need to try to help more, because most things are politicized in a way that it's the opposition versus who is in power. No matter what it is, there's some type of back and forth, and we see it in all the countries across the Caribbean where the opposition is against something when it comes to vaccination. So it's good that they are encouraging people now. I wish more oppositions would do the same, because we really want to get people to a place where we are not seeing all these deaths and people getting sick and all of these things. That should be the end goal for everybody.
Right. The opposition here, in fairness to them, they will say that they have been in support of the vaccination program. The political leader, I've said this before, and Peter knows this, that he has come out front and center publicly, encourage people to do the right thing, get vaccinated, and so on and so forth. And so the party believes that the vaccination program, yes, people ought to go and get vaccinated. They just have issues with the way the government has managed it. And their argument is that mandatory vaccination is not the way to go, because it's going to divide Antigua and Barbuda society. It's going to create a case of, haves and have-nots as far as the vaccine is concerned. And they don't think that is helpful. People are going to be resentful, and people are going to be angry, and they just think that this mandatory vaccination policy is wrong. They think that the government should have gone the route of persuasion. And I guess this morning we emphasized that point, the act of persuasion. The opponents of that argument will argue, or will say, that persuasion has been taking place for the last however long, and people are still dithering and wasting time, and in time people are in the ICU, which has no more room. I need to ask the government about that on Monday, mind you, why they have no more room, because we're supposed to have some infectious disease center, etc., etc. But people are saying people are dying, and so we just can't afford to continue to wait for people to wait for the next vaccine that we don't have. Every time we have a vaccine, we have 5 vaccines, right? And there's some people who said they were waiting for the Pfizer. Now the Pfizer is here, they're now telling me they're waiting for the Cuban. And we don't know when the Cuban is going to get here. So I suppose when we get the Cuban, they'll say they wait for the Moderna, because that's the one the Prime Minister took. It just never ends. So the Prime Minister said, fish or cut bait. Let's go. Yeah. Peter.
Yeah, no, I think part of the problem initially was really a question of supply. And if I look at countries, and the reason I mentioned size in case of St. Kitts and Nevis, I look at countries like Cayman Islands. And regionally, Cayman Islands and St. Kitts have essentially been gold standard for COVID management. And my feeling is that in both of those instances, there was sufficient money to lock the place down and keep people at home while giving them a subsidy to live on. And there was also access to vaccines, because you had access to vaccines in fairly large quantities early in the day. And the good thing with St. Kitts population is that when you're looking at 40,000 people, it's easy to beg somebody for 20, 30,000 vaccines, and it wouldn't be a big problem. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, you're looking at 1 million vaccines, and that is a substantially more challenging number to meet. And I think that that's part of the problem, part of the reason that St. Kitts was able to do well, because you guys got in early, you had sufficient vaccines, and you were able to get people vaccinated. One of the problems that Antigua has, and Barbados has this problem too, is that when someone goes to a vaccination center, if the vaccines are indeed available, because initially there was an issue of availability, and they greeted with a long line, the reaction may be to say, well, let me not bother. While in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, the numbers were small, the availability was large, and you had a healthcare system that, before people sit down and think twice, they had the vaccination in the arm, and they say, well, what happened, Sure. And I think that really is the benefit of size. Cayman Islands is the same thing. Cayman Islands was able to vaccinate virtually everyone because the UK gave them vaccinations. Theirs was even more successful than the UK itself, because again, small place, and they were able to manage those numbers. But a lot of this is academic conversation, but I think it has come to the point now where the horse has bolted, and this thing is crazy. The numbers are crazy. In Barbados yesterday, we recorded 160 cases. Which was for us, it was significant. It's the highest number that we've ever recorded in a single day. We have quarantine centers bursting at the seams. Schools now have been turned into quarantine centers because government took a decision that they were going to quarantine everyone. And the numbers are not manageable. So it's a situation where you need to say to people who aren't vaccinated, especially ones that are vulnerable, let's get cracking. And that's the reason why I admire the Prime Minister for taking that bold decision, which could have political consequences. But his thing is that the life of the country and the well-being of the country is far more important at this stage. And, I think that level to some extent has cooperated. I mean, he could really have made life a lot more difficult, but I think that he's cooperated to some extent, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Let me ask you, Peter, do you think that Mia or any other regional leader is going to go down the road of mandatory vaccinations?
Yeah. But Mia's playing an interesting game, and she is in bed now with the this is figuratively speaking, of course, with the leader of the major trade union, the Barbados Workers Union. Tony Moore has been strident in opposition to the idea of a mandatory vaccine, and she's a member of Mia's party. It makes it difficult for Mia to drive a policy when you are basically in political bed with the social partnership. So not only the trade unions, but all of the other unions that are in something called CUSAB, which is a coalition of trade unions and staff associations, very close to government. And they are diametrically opposed to vaccine mandates. Personally, I think that left to her own devices, Prime Minister Motley would probably be pushing harder. But because of this close relationship with the social partnership, she's been hesitant to go down that road. But at the same time, she's been getting a high level of compliance without having to do so. My sense is that if she's been able to vaccinate all the doctors, virtually all the nurses in nursing homes, and the vast majority of people in Barbados are cooperating, she doesn't probably have to speak that language in terms of being able to get to the point where she wants to get to, and she's being helped in that regard. She did a fairly controversial thing this week in that she plucked the Darren Massey Ward of Barbados Radio out of one of the private radio stations and dropped him in a position called the COVID advisor. So he's now in a role where, sorry, Darren?
David Ellis?
David Ellis, yeah. I call him the Darren Massey Ward of Barbados Radio.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm flattered because he's a veteran, David.
Yeah. And he's now on the front line batting for this thing and telling people, go to get vaccinated. And it's been controversial, but to some extent it's helping a lot of the hesitant people, say, let's do this thing because clearly this is across the board now.
Peter, I have a question. Yeah. It's obvious that as time moves on, we are moving to a position where we are, I guess, learning to live with the vaccine is the term that, with the virus, which is the term that a lot of people are using. We've seen now in St. Kitts where it seems as though the things that would have triggered lockdowns in the past, those thresholds have moved severely or have changed in some cases, right? In some cases, we had people calling for lockdown after we had one case in the community. Now we have over 700 and smooth sailing, right? So it's obvious to me that we are moving away from those types of responses,
measures,
right? At what do you believe? At what point or what variables do you believe are going to cause us to move even further to a place where perhaps there's not even quarantine required for this?
No, that's an excellent point, and I think that is a reality of the fact that, I mean, in fairness to him, Boris Johnson said it early in the day that this thing is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And you can't run a marathon by imposing the most draconian measures up front. So in most of our cases, we had lockdowns early on, and government has run out of the resources to be able to finance the lockdown, and people have run out of patience with it.
Right.
You have a lockdown where a man that has two women can only see one of them for an extended period of time. It imposes a level of social stress that people will not tolerate for any longer.
Yeah, Kevon really been dealing with
that. There you go. So that's the kind of thing, and I think that has run out. People have run out of patience with that, and that's the reason why we are here now. I don't believe that people would tolerate another lockdown, and I don't think the government's going to afford another lockdown. So by force of the reality, we are now moved to a place where we're saying, look, if it is that the vaccination will work to get things going again, then that seems to be the most tolerable. Device. And if you follow the pattern here in France, in Europe, and in the United States of America, the reason that it's less of an issue now is because with the high level of vaccination, it's less of a problem when people get COVID. So, I mean, people catch COVID routinely in France, and it passes through them like nothing. And it's not an issue, largely because if you are vaccinated, the illness doesn't have the impact on the healthcare system that it would. The challenge we are having in the Caribbean is that when someone catches COVID, the possibility of that person getting critically ill is higher. And, you need to talk about ventilators and stuff like that. That's not the case. So my sense is that people will start ignoring it as an issue when we get to the stage where the numbers of infected people in secondary isolation is not comparable to the numbers in primary isolation. So when you have a high level of infected, vaccinated people who are not getting sick or dying, I think that's when people will say, look, this thing is no longer an issue, really.
You're right, correct. Do you believe that there are some governments who are thankful that, for instance, the private sector would have been calling for the stoppage of the lockdowns, meaning that if there is a lockdown, the government now has to find money to subsidize people's livelihoods.
In all cases.
And not doing that. And for instance, in the case of St. Kitts, where that call came primarily from the private sector, it almost seems like they're off the hook now. Like they don't have to.
True.
Yeah, they believe that their governments are enjoying that.
Yeah. No, I think in all of the countries, the private sector has been strident in their argument that they can't tolerate further lockdowns because they can't make any money. And government needs them to make money, to tax this money, to be able to pay public servants. what I have found interesting is that the public servants unions and the public servants generally have been the most opposed to mandatory vaccination and the most supportive of mandatory lockdowns. And to me, it's a selfishness, which I find highly offensive, where someone who works in a government office, off the profits of someone who works in the tourism sector that is taxed by government to pay them their salary, that person will work in the government office and say, I prefer a lockdown to vaccination because I know I'm going to still get paid. While the person who works in the tourism sector is saying, look, let's get the vaccination, let's open up the economy because I want to be able to go to work in a hotel and earn some money. But what we have found is that the level of opposition has been coming from people who are unionized and people who are largely in the public sector. That's the problem, because these people don't understand that their salaries are paid by private sector resources that government is taxing and paying them. So you're very right. And I think governments are happy that the private sector has been so vocal and saying, look, we can't have another lockdown. We can't afford another lockdown. We are at the stage now where the issue of face-to-face classes in school has also become a private sector problem, because the private sector is saying, we have uniforms to sell, we have school shoes to sell, we have book bags, a lot of economic activity associated with school. All of that is dead now because children are at home staring into a computer screen. So that has now become an economic issue. And they're saying, well, if it is that you can vaccinate the children and get them back face to face and vaccinate teachers, why not? Let's do it, because we need to get people back in a face to face environment because there's an economic aspect to it.
Right. And just to emphasize that point, Peter, the teachers union voted a resolution to reject, mandatory vaccinations. Of course, the Prime Minister dissed it and said, it has no, I think he said they have no locus standi, or what's that effect? And then the Employers Federation came out in full support of mandatory vaccination. So that just punctuates the point that you just made. Private sector looking at it one way, and unions largely representing folks in the public sector looking at it another way. But speaking of political consequences, this is the question that I put to my guest from the UPP this morning. What do you think the political consequence may be for Prime Minister Raquel Brown and his government coming out of this decision to institute mandatory vaccinations?
This to me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. All right. No, I mean, there's two ways we can look at it. One way is that I find if opposition is really supported, if opposition to vaccines is related to political support, which means that in the vast majority of instances, people who oppose the vaccine oppose it simply because they also oppose the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, then the fallout is minimal. And I think that certainly in Barbados, the case is that 9 out of 10 people who oppose the vaccine oppose it because they also oppose the government and they don't like the Prime Minister and they feel that they are hurting her by taking that position. So if it is that that's the case, if that theory holds, then the fallout will be minimal. The other way I can look at it is that there are some people who are maybe on the fence that find the imposition of this is offensive. People like Rastafarians who believe that their views are being trampled upon and so on. My experience has been that those numbers are relatively small in the context of most societies. People who are on that kind of fence, they're usually less than 1%. So in marginal constituencies, it could make a difference, but otherwise, no. But then the third theory, which I'm most comfortable with, is that these things are usually 12-day wonders. And I am confident that a year from now, if the economies are working, everybody can forget this whole question of mandatory vaccination, assuming that the vaccination don't make us grow wings and fly, a year from now.
That might actually be good for the economy.
But I tell you, there will be a lot of people flying because you got 20-something million people in Europe, vaccinated, and we'll all be flying about. But, barring that, I think that a year from now, people will forget this experience and they will start to move on because they will say, well, look, it saved the economy. We had a situation in Barbados many years ago where government cut public servant salaries, by 8%. And there was a lot of anger. And I lived to see the day where the person who did that, who made that decision, everyone said, but the man was such a brave person to be able to take that kind of hard decision. Precisely. He's now knighted. Yeah. Yes. So there's hope yet for Gaston Brown in this regard, and any others. I mean, I think Ralph Gonzalez is probably the one that is most vilified.
Right.
And I would say that in his case, the danger is greatest because he's already a minority. He has less popular support than the opposition, and he's on his 5th term, so he's skating on very, very thin ice. But in his case, I don't think he's running again anyhow. So I mean, it isn't as though he will be held up to scrutiny, and the party will have to recover whatever they can from it. But he also has the worst problem, simply because he has the highest level of resistance or one of the highest levels in the Caribbean, and he has to badly deal with it.
Do you think that's political in St. Vincent? I mean,
Oh yeah, it's very, very political. I mean, everything in St. Vincent is political, and I think it is far worse. There's a level of tribalism that has taken over. I've always argued that St. Kitts and Nevis is probably one of the most politically tribal communities in the Caribbean. After Jamaica, St. Kitts is coming in there, but St. Vincent and the Grenadines has emerged now in a way that is shocking. I mean, to do violence to a prime minister is a heavy thing. I don't believe in St. Kitts and Nevis that would happen. Certainly not in Antigua.
I don't think that would be a go-to for Kitts and Nevis.
Any opponents to Mr. Brown would be well advised.
Not to.
You pull out the glass.
You would take up the stone and fling it back. Yeah. Anyway, listen, Peter, just one of your friends, or friend, well, I just shouldn't say, I say friends in
inverted covers.
Yes, is saying that Peter was wrong about the St. Lucia elections. Were you wrong about the St. Lucia elections with Alan Chastanet and thing, Peter?
Not at all. I never published public opinion. Actually, I am working on an article for this weekend that makes the point that I was extremely accurate where that was concerned. The problem is that the polls were not published for obvious reasons, and I can't say that. I don't think at any point in time when I was commenting in the St. Lucia situation did I say that I was confident that Alan Chastanet would win. I always said that he could lose. And I was very, very careful in choosing my words because I knew the poll data that I was looking at. So, the challenge I always have is that sometimes in these instances, I have confidential information which I have been sworn to secrecy on, and I can't speak of it openly. So my comments are essentially very softened by the fact that I have something in front of me that is telling me. But I'm comfortable that we were spot on in St. Lucia. There was clearly a momentum that COVID had, and if you read my article from last Sunday, I chronicle a situation where St. Kitts captured the time when COVID kept governments in power. St. Lucia captured the moment when COVID pushed governments out of power. And you saw it in Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, Curacao, and Bahamas. Bahamas was the most violent,
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge in St. Lucia, that it's a COVID election that you're fighting in that reality. So my friend, whoever he is, he can go on my Facebook page and download the article and read it, and he may get a sense of what my real views on St. Lucia are. I wish Pierre well, I really do.
Yeah. I haven't heard much coming out of St. Lucia since, well, at least from my vantage point. Perhaps we'll set up a regional link up with someone in St. Lucia to get a sense of what's happening there in the new era of the new Prime Minister.
The COVID thing is crazy in St. Lucia. No, I mean, COVID is off the charts in St. Lucia, and the grave concerns is that Philip Jean-Pierre has not had a chance to catch himself before this came out. What is interesting though is this scandal that just emerged with the vaccine purchases, because it would appear as though St. Lucia paid some money to a company, the principal of whom is based in Barbados. And they have not received the vaccines. Apparently 1 million vaccines were negotiated. I don't know whether Antigua was involved in that. I doubt it, or St. Kitts, but it seems as though there were some people who put some money into this company and the vaccines never procured. So that is the scandal in St. Lucia now, because St. Lucia actually put money out. Barbados government claimed they never put money in, but apparently the St. Lucian government did. So Alan Chastanet is being asked to account for the fact that they didn't do sufficient due diligence regarding this firm that was supposed to be producing these 1 million vaccines.
Okay. Peter, let me ask you this before we wrap in a minute or two. By the way, Azem, Kevon, you're quiet. Oh Lord, where is Kevon quiet?
But Kevon always seems to be quiet. I don't ever hear him.
Oh, dear. There you go. Kevon, you've been called out.
Multitasking. It's not my strong suit.
Okay, all right, very well. You see, be careful with that. You know the ladies say women.
Plus, I'm not very big on politics, which is that everybody knows this. And politics is just
you're not big on politics. Yeah, I don't blame
the
you.
tribalism. To be quite candid, the tribalism of saying it's politics has created a massive disinterest for me. So usually when conversations of like politics pops up, I usually just sort of like I do more listening than talking when it comes to conversations of politics.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Let me ask. By the way, Jade, you had a question or follow up, or Azem?
Well, I mean, just to backtrack just a little bit. We are speaking about lockdowns versus just managing, especially using the vaccine as one of the main tools. I do believe that there's a possibility, especially in some of the islands with the low vaccination rate, that we could have somewhat of a unintentional lockdown or slowdown of the economy if the numbers continue to rise and persons end up in quarantine. We have this thing where if you and I guess it depends on the policies and the protocols in each of the countries. So for instance here, if you get tested positive, you're going to a 14-day quarantine until you're given a test and you have a negative result. And persons who come into close contact with you would then go into isolation, and then how they are dealt with depends on the vaccination status. So if you're vaccinated, you may be out for 1 to 3 days while you wait on the results of your test. But if you're unvaccinated, even if you have a negative result, you're still expected to isolate for 14 days. So if the numbers go up, we have a high number of persons who are not going out to work. You have companies that are closing down because of close contact with a coworker who would have tested positive. And so it almost feels as though we're still in a situation where the economy is not really functioning as the numbers get higher and higher and higher. Is this a consideration that you've heard from the private sector in any of the islands?
This me again?
Well, anybody?
The private sector has been. I've heard private sector in almost every instance concerning about that. I mean, the point is that when they have to close down a business, and this has been a big issue in Barbados, when they have a high level of unvaccinated people in their business, and they are required they have an infection, they have to close down to clean. Even that they've been complaining about. Far less a situation where people have been, not turning out to work. So the solution has been to incentivize the staff to get vaccinated. So the likelihood of them having an outbreak among staff is lower, and they'll be able to get to work. And that's the reason why in some places people have been saying, people have been bullying the staff. One of the proprietors in Barbados, he's offered every member of staff a voucher for $300 Barbados dollars to go and get vaccinated and a day off, So if they don't feel well after, they have the opportunity to stay home. And that's a serious concern.
Do you believe that this is then going to push eventually the private sector to pressure the government, the health officials to change the policies as it relates to isolation and quarantine?
I think it's coming to that point. Less because of the private sector push, and more because of the numbers now can't reasonably be accommodated. And I think that there's a practicality to the numbers that they have to accommodate in terms of isolation and whatnot. It's just too many people, and I think that the practicality of it has come to the point now where maybe they're going to have to consider other options in many instances. And one of them maybe is that when people are tested positive, if they're vaccinated, maybe they can return to work far soon. I think in the UK, the protocol has changed. So if you're tested positive and you are vaccinated, the protocol for you is different to someone who tests positive and is unvaccinated.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, well, you see, I think we're gonna get there sooner rather than later, because if we and like you said, the horse has bolted. It's out of the gate. People are going to get infected. We're not locking down, and so the numbers are going to continue to increase. And so if you're gonna say if everybody get it, well, everybody can quarantine. So at some point we're gonna have to just that recognize that cannot be the response. But I'm waiting to see how that evolves as we move forward, to be honest.
So I know we're about to wrap up, but just a quick question for you guys. What are your thoughts on the situation in Grenada? I know we spoke about it here on the show before, but I would like to hear from you guys. Like, what do you think they can do? What's next for them? Like, where are they headed?
Peter, I'm leaving that at you, Peter.
But Grenada,
not me. I'm leaving that here.
Yeah. I think Grenada is in a worst case scenario, and Grenada is suffering from a major error that they made in terms of people's insistence that they had to play mass and do job, and they know consequences of it. And it's ironic because initially Grenada had one of the most stringent lockdown policies where people couldn't even move outside of a certain number of kilometers in terms of doing groceries. So it was interesting that they found themselves in that situation, but COVID exhaustion. I have my hopes that Grenada can get the vaccination back up and they can maintain some kind of but they seem to have the worst problem in terms of people getting sick and dying. And they have at least probably one of the lower levels of vaccinations across the region. So that continues to be a challenge. I think it's a lesson that we can learn from. And that's how I would see it. I would see it as a lesson that we will learn from. And Gaston Brown has already made the point that there's certain things that we just have to accept that we can't do for the time being. And one of them is that we can't play mass and be up among one another. Hopefully, it will make it easier for mandatory policies to be imposed in Grenada. And I mean, Grenadian hotel sector was one of the first ones that declared that they were going mandatory. Either get vaccinated or don't come in at them. St. George's University, the same thing. University of West Indies has not yet taken that position, but St. George's is well ahead. So maybe the challenges that Grenada has faced can be a lesson for all of us in terms of what has to be done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before we go, I do have one question though.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of countries, and not just specifically countries like the governments. We see lots of privately owned companies doing incentives towards getting vaccinated. How do you feel about the incentive thing? Because I know I've heard lots of mixed feelings from the population. Some people are saying it sounds like bribery. Some people are saying it sounds like encouragement. What's your take on the incentives for vaccinations?
I find the incentives crass. A box of KFC for vaccination. I find it crass, and I think it's somewhat embarrassing that's why it has been reduced in the case of Barbados. When I was a child, I went to polio. We had polio vaccinations. I think everyone in this group would have had polio campaigns at their schools when they were growing up. And the nurses came, and your incentive was a sugar cube. And the sugar cube had the polio on it, and you went and you took it, and you did not question or complain. In my case, we had a resident opposite the school who used to come on the school grounds that had been afflicted with polio. And the condition that he was in was enough of an incentive for us to say, let's just go and get vaccinated. So, I mean, when you come 30 years later and you say to people that in order for them to get a life-saving vaccination that would save their life and save the economy, that you got to get them a box of KFC is embarrassing. But my thing is that if that's what it takes, I'm at the stage now where I'm saying if it takes a box of KFC to get someone to change from being an anti-vaxxer to a vaxxer, then I would give them the box of KFC and say, if the price of your cooperation is worth a box of chicken, knock yourself out. But it's unfortunate that it has to go to that's the kind of people that we are in the Caribbean, where a box of chicken would make a difference between that kind of principle. And they said in the days before, MRI, measles, all those things, you never needed to give an incentive. Indeed, in many of our cases at school, when the nurse came to give those vaccinations, the incentive you had for taking it was that if you didn't take it, you would get a lash. So you took a shut up.
Anyway,
yeah.
I gotta go. That sounds
all right.
Peter and the gang. But yes, thank you so much for this regional link up. We had good fun as usual discussing serious issues. We tried to make it as palatable as we could. Hope the listeners enjoyed. And I would just want to say thanks again, Peter, for joining us, making the time available. And
pleasure.
Jade and Kevon and Azem, thank you also as well for facilitating the Zoom.
Of course,
okay.
Of course.
My pleasure.
I'm here as well, but thanks, Darren.
I said Jade. Wait, what? What? You want me to say Jade again? Yes,
Please,
Jade.
thanks.
Good morning.
Yes.
Lord of mercy.
Thank you guys for
Go on,
joining us,
Angel.
and we will
Bye-bye.
link up again soon.
Okay, take care.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
weekend.
All
Yeah.
right. So, guys, we will be right back. We are going to take a very short break and come back with more Island Tea right here on Wood Media SKN. So, stay tuned.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
It's happening again. By popular demand, we're doing it again. Yep.